Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington is in talks with several countries, including China, and aiming for a fair deal that could eventually see tariffs on Beijing rolled back. Taiwan's currency records its largest two-day jump in decades, threatening to hit the competitiveness of the island's export-oriented economy. South Korea's Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung holds his lead in the polls, despite the threat of election law charges. Conservatives may weigh a merger to close the gap. 10 dead and dozens injured after fierce winds capsized tourist boats at a scenic spot in southwest China. President Xi has called for tighter safety measures. Also in East Asia tonight, could artificial intelligence development succeed as a key sector to drive Hong Kong's growth? See what the city is up to as it aligns itself with China's national plans. And after years of cheap long-distance calls and memories, Skype hangs up for good. U.S. President Donald Trump says that Washington could strike trade agreements with some countries as early as this week. The main priority with China, Mr. Trump stresses, is to set what he describes as a fair deal. And this comes amid hopes that the world's two biggest economies could pull back from an all-out trade war.
Well, I want a fair deal with China, but China's been ripping us off for many years, so maybe something should be thought about, a little bit of retribution. China's been ripping us off for many years, ever since they started.
Mr. Trump says he has no plans at the moment to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week, but signals that American officials are having conversations with their Chinese counterparts on a variety of different issues. Well, the U.S. president hinted that he did not expect to reach an agreement with some countries, but could instead be, a quote, setting a certain tariff for those trading partners in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Now we're not dealing with China at all because the tariff's so high that they basically can't deal. And because of that, we're saving billions of dollars,
China on Friday said it was evaluating an offer from U.S. to hold talks. Beijing has hit back with 125% levies in response to the 145% tariffs set by Washington. Well, the Trump administration previously hinted that it is close to deals with countries including South Korea, Japan, and India, among others. Roland Lim is here with the latest from the business world. So, Roland, I believe there's been a sudden surge in Asian currencies amid all the tariff uncertainties. So what exactly is driving that?
Right, Oteli. Asian currencies are benefiting from a mix of repatriation buying as well as alternative investment increase in a sign of growing reluctance among investors to hold U.S. assets. Now, case in point, the Taiwan dollar. A meteoric surge in the currency is roiling domestic markets and fueling speculation that some Asian countries are prepared to engineer revaluations of their currencies to win U.S. trade concessions. Now, the currency jumped again today, its second straight sharp rise. It strengthened more than 4% against the greenback at one point. And that follows Friday's surge, the biggest one-day climb in over 3 decades. The rally spooking investors as the benchmark index plunged more than 400 points before clawing back some of the losses. Taiwan Central Bank has denied any direct U.S. pressure, saying that speculation about a stronger currency drove the spike. But for tech exporters, the currency rally is a growing headache on top of the Trump administration's 32% tariff rate. Major suppliers warn the stronger Taiwan dollar is eating into profits and making exports less competitive. With exports making up more than 60% of Taiwan's GDP, the stakes are high. TSMC, for instance, says that every 1% drop in the US dollar could shave 0.4 points off its margins. Now, as uncertainty deepens, even consumers are rushing to exchange currencies briefly overwhelming bank apps across the island.
So, what's driving the surge and which currencies are the better bets right now? Well, Roland Lim is in the hot seat to tell us more. So, Roland, let's start with the big picture question. Asian currencies are rallying. Taiwan's dollar, I believe, jumped as much as 5%. And you've got the Hong Kong Monetary Authority actually having to step in with a record intervention. So, what's behind these explosive moves?
Yeah, it really comes down to two drivers. One is the broadening, weakening of the US dollar, and the other, of course, is the shifting capital flows. Now, the so-called sell America trade, well, that is intensified because investors are worried about a recession in the US. They are worried about Trump's unpredictable trade stance. They are worried about expectations of a rate cut, and the Feds by the Fed, and that is pushing traders to actually sell the dollar. Meantime, Asian currencies, the likes of the Thai baht, Taiwan dollar, as I've just mentioned, even offshore yuan, well, that is all benefiting from repatriation demand as well as exporter demand, buying those local currencies. The Bloomberg Asia Currency Index, that's a basket of Asian currencies against the dollar, that had its biggest one-day gain since 2022 on Friday. So it's not just noise we're hearing, it's actually starting to be a trend.
And you know, you've spoken, you read up about some of what these analysts are saying in terms of the currencies and where they are headed. What are they saying?
Right. Well, that's a good question. The traders are actually got their eye on three specific currencies. One is the Taiwan dollar because of the tech story there, as well as the investments going into the country. That's also getting the central bank to be a bit wary, so be careful there of any intervention by the Taiwanese central bank. The Malaysian ringgit, well, the ringgit on Friday had its biggest one-day gain in several months, up 1% against the dollar, and that's on the back of high commodity prices, palm oil, natural gas. And so if global demand for these commodities stabilize, well, the ringgit could also appreciate. And then there's surprisingly, the offshore yuan, Chinese currency. Despite geopolitical risks, we are seeing a shift of exporters actually buying into the currency, the Chinese currency, as opposed to the US dollar. But remember, there's a caveat to this. I mean, currency is two-edged sword. So currencies for Asian economies rise, well, that's going to make their exports more expensive, less competitive. So don't be surprised if the central banks from these respective Asian currencies, or countries, I should say, or economies, actually will intervene.
What about the outlook for the US dollar? I mean, can its weakness persist?
It probably will. I mean, the trend for a weak US dollar started in September. The big houses like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley are also predicting that it'll go lower. That's because of the uncertainty to do with trade, as well as the fact that yield curves are going to steepen, and the Fed is expected to cut interest rates. This is the risk premium now attached to a Trump administration. So unless fiscal policy and as well as trade policies in the US actually stabilize or change for the better, we are going to see the US dollar further weaken, and that's going to add a tailwind to the Asian currencies I just mentioned.
And what else is happening in Trump's world? He's made some announcements again, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. The movie industry is the latest casualty in President Trump's tariff war. Now, he says he's ordering 100% tariffs on all movies made outside the US. In a Truth Social post, the president said, the American movie industry is dying. Now, he blamed incentives offered by other countries for drawing filmmakers and studios away from the US and called it a national security threat. Now, he has also labeled it as messaging and propaganda and saying that he has authorized officials to immediately enact the tariff. Details on how it would be implemented remain vague, like how it would work, as well as how it would be applied. Analysts say the move will likely deal a significant blow to major movie studios, including Walt Disney Company and Warner Brothers Discovery. President Trump did not mention any government or country in particular, but this does come after China restricted the imports of Hollywood films last month in retaliation for tariffs on Chinese goods. Hong Kong has identified artificial intelligence as one of the key sectors to drive sustainable growth. It is aligning itself to China's national development, focusing on areas such as supercomputing capabilities, data, and talent in AI. The city also seeking to support local institutions in the tech sector, pumping in $129 million to establish a new R&D center. Mei Wong finds out how Hong Kong is faring in the local AI game.
I got a fever and it's hard for me to sleep.
This is an AI-driven model that can conduct a pre-consultation before a patient physically sees a doctor. Called MedDoctor, it works like a medical GPT and can answer questions, generate medical reports, and provide initial diagnoses based on medical images. Developed locally by the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, it can compile medical information and help save precious time when doctors can focus on patients' treatment. Another locally AI-developed model, MOMI, helps to diagnose breast cancer. It can distinguish malignant from benign breast lumps using MRI scans without the need for invasive biopsies. The model achieves an accuracy level comparable to radiologists with more than 5 years' experience, according to Dr. Hao Chen, who leads the two AI projects.
For the whole career of a doctor, they actually can't see a million cases or several million cases here. But with the good digital infrastructure, large-scale data that we collected from the hospitals, the AI models, by learning from this large-scale data, they actually can mine the knowledge. The AI models can provide more objective information here, and then it can reduce the inconsistency, such actually facilitate the improvement of the accuracy.
Both projects are in the final phase of pilot testing with local hospitals before the official launch. And it's not just universities that are developing AI models in Hong Kong. Consultancy firm Deloitte, for example, started its own AI institute in early 2023 to develop customized AI projects for its clients.
We are working for example, an insurance company. And then conventionally, usually we have some chatbot that can only take care of 2 or 3 documents. But now we have a system that can take care of more than 10,000 documents. But now they can use AI, you can use their own tablet to search for the answer that they want, and very efficient and quick.
Compared to other Chinese cities like Shenzhen and Hangzhou, who are early movers in AI development, Hong Kong appears to be late in the game. However, some believe Hong Kong does not need to play catch-up with them. Instead, the city should tap on its financial hub status to ramp up AI development targeted at this sector and also take the lead in devising AI regulations.
At the moment, the AI regulatory framework is still weak. We have conducted some earlier research on responsible AI. We look at the safety and responsibility of AI usage. For example, if you ask AI a question about an unethical question or illegal question, whether AI can reply to you, right? In the future, the government should have come up with a set of regulatory framework to show how to appropriately develop AI and guide AI usage.
There's no doubt that AI is the future. And at the Hong Kong Science Park here is home to many research, tech and innovation companies, including a number of AI startups. And that's exactly what the Hong Kong authorities want to see, greater development in AI. That's because the government believes that AI will define the competitiveness of corporations and economies and also have a significant impact on geopolitics in the future. Mei Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
After 2 decades of connecting people, Skype will ring for the last time today. Microsoft is retiring the internet calling pioneer as it sharpens its focus on its newer flagship platform, Teams.
It's a sound many grew up with, the classic Skype ringtone. Launched in 2003, Skype changed the game. free audio and video calls across borders. Landlines suddenly became outdated. It became a household name, boasting hundreds of millions of users. But fast forward to today, and Skype feels like a relic. It struggled in the smartphone era. Zoom, Slack, FaceTime, all easier to use, more reliable. Skype simply failed to adapt. Then came the pandemic, and remote work surged. Microsoft shifted its focus to something built for business. It backed Teams fully, integrating it tightly with Word, Excel, and Outlook. A package deal for the remote office world. Microsoft had bought Skype in 2011 for $8.5 billion, outbidding Google and Facebook. Back then, Skype had 150 million monthly users. But nearly a decade later, that number dropped to just 23 million. Its sunset marks another chapter in Microsoft's graveyard of mishandled high-stakes bets, joining the likes of Internet Explorer and Windows Phone. That means the end of one of the most recognizable tech products of this century. Skype users can now switch to Teams for free, with the same login credentials, chats, and contacts carried over. Microsoft says Teams has 320 million active users today. Skype's final call is also a clear signal. The future of work is already taking shape, and Microsoft is turning up the volume on Teams.
And that's it for business. Otelli's back to you.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Right, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, the race to become the president of South Korea heating up despite yet another uncertainty that may be just around the corner. Strong winds and rain capsized boats carrying tourists in China's southwest. In South Korea, Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung continues to lead in public opinion polls, despite the possibility of facing charges for violating election laws. Well, a Real Meter survey suggests the race is shaping up to be a three-way contest, with Lee commanding 46.6% support. Trailing behind is People Power Party candidate Kim Moon-soo, while Lee Jun-sok of the minor conservative New Reform Party is polling at 7.5%. Well, Lee's approval ratings have dipped slightly from the previous week, following a Supreme Court decision that overturned a lower court ruling which had cleared him of election law violations. Well, at that time, he was polling at 50.9%. Lee is now scheduled to be retried on 15th of May, just days after a deadline for presidential candidate registration. Meanwhile, the ruling People Power Party is reportedly considering a merger between its current presidential nominee, Kim Moon-soo, and former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who stepped down as acting president last week, citing what he called a heavier responsibility. Now, Han told reporters he has proposed a meeting with Kim to discuss a possible unification of their candidacies ahead of the June 3rd election. Political observers say a merger may be inevitable if the Conservatives hope to overcome Lee's comfortable lead. The same Real Meter survey released on Monday shows 30% of respondents believe Han would be the most suitable single candidate to represent the Conservative bloc, compared to 21.9% who favoured Kim. Japan's Defence Minister Gin Nakatani has met with his Indian counterpart in New Delhi during a two-day official visit to the South Asian nation. Well, India's Defence Ministry says the talks revolve around the current global security situation and are also aimed at strengthening defence cooperation between India and Japan. This is the second meeting between the two defence chiefs in 6 months, their first being on the sidelines of the ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting in Laos last November. Both India and Japan are part of the Quad, a security alliance that includes Australia and the US, aimed at countering China's rising influence in Asia. The talks come as Japan ramps up its diplomatic outreach amid an increasingly uncertain geopolitical landscape. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba visited Vietnam last week, where officials from both countries agreed to boost bilateral trade and uphold global rules on the free flow of goods, as nations worldwide brace for the impact of crippling and sweeping tariffs from the US. Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to visit Russia this week as Beijing seeks to rally support for its opposition to U.S. tariffs. Now, he'll join Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow and attend celebrations commemorating victory in World War II. China's foreign ministry says the state visit from Wednesday to Saturday will add new substance to the strategic coordination between the two countries. It will be their first meeting since the annual BRICS summit in October. The Kremlin says the two leaders expect to discuss strengthening their partnership as well as sign several bilateral agreements. Mr. Xi will be among a number of world leaders attending the Victory Day parade. Their presence could be seen as a diplomatic win, with Russia continuing to face criticism over the war in Ukraine. Well, the meeting between President Xi and Putin also comes as relations between Russia and the U.S. shift following Washington's minerals deal with Kyiv. President Putin earlier offered a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine to coincide with Moscow's Victory Day celebrations. Moscow has said the halt in fighting will test Kyiv's readiness for a peaceful resolution. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has cast doubt on whether Russia will abide by its proposed truce. He cited a Ukrainian military report that showed Russia carried out more than 200 attacks on Saturday.
Moscow has denied targeting civilians after it began a full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 3 years ago. In a state TV documentary aired on Sunday about the Russian president, Putin was asked about the risk of nuclear escalation. They wanted to provoke us so that we made mistakes, Putin said. There has been no need to use those weapons, he added, and I hope they will not be required. The president also said his country has, quote, enough strength and means to bring what was started in 2022 to a logical conclusion with the outcome Russia requires. The carefully choreographed film was released as the Kremlin announced that China's President Xi Jinping will make an official visit to Russia next week. He'll be taking part in the 80th anniversary celebrations marking the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. Russian armed forces were seen holding rehearsals on Saturday ahead of a massive military parade set for May the 9th. Putin has proposed a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine around the anniversary. In a social media post on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called it top-level cynicism, saying, quote, the Russians are calling for a ceasefire while striking Ukraine every single day with thousands of drone and bomb attacks launched this week alone. Zelensky, who was in Prague on Sunday to meet his Czech counterpart, has said he is ready for a truce if it would last at least a month. But Putin has ruled that out in the near term, saying he wants a long-term settlement, not a brief pause.
Chinese state media is reporting that at least 10 people have died after several boats carrying tourists capsized in the southwestern region yesterday. Well, the passenger vessels were said to be along a river in Tianxi city of Guizhou province. It overturned following strong winds and rain, throwing 84 people overboard. Authorities say about 70 people were hospitalized. Nearly 500 rescue workers were deployed to assist with the accident. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has demanded the proper handling of affairs related to the victims and their families. He underscored the importance of strengthening safety measures in tourist attractions amid a trend of safety-related incidents. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Australia's newly re-elected government says it will prioritise dealing with what it calls the dark shadow of the US-China trade war. We'll speak with an expert for more insights in just a moment. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Donald Trump repeats his claim that China has been taking advantage of the U.S. as Washington suggests it might strike trade deals with some countries as early as this week. Now, Taiwan dollar saw its largest two-day jump in decades, raising fears that it can impact the competitiveness of the island's export-oriented economy. And in South Korea, the presidential election is shaping up to be a three-way race. People Power Party candidate Kim Won-soo trails behind Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung. New Reform Party Lee Jun-suk is in third place. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he has held a warm conversation with US President Donald Trump following his Labour Party's landslide win in the general elections over the weekend.
I had a very warm and positive conversation with President Trump just a short while ago when I was at the Lodge, and I thank him for his very warm message of congratulations. We talked about how AUKUS and tariffs will continue to engage. We will engage with each other on a face-to-face basis at some time in the future.
Mr. Trump has described his relationship with the Australian leader as friendly, though he added that he did not know anything about the election in Australia. Well, analysts say Mr. Albanese's slow but steady leadership resonated with voters worried about the impact of Trump's tariffs, which contributed to his party's decisive win. Well, the Labour government said yesterday that it will prioritise dealing with what it calls the dark shadow of the US-China trade war, as Beijing signalled its readiness to work with the new administration to advance ties. Now, Roger Maynard tells us more about the conversation between Mr. Albanese and Mr. Trump and its significance when it comes to Australia-US relations.
Yeah, Australia's newly re-elected Prime Minister will certainly be reassured by the tone of his conversation with the US President. Labour's Anthony Albanese needs to keep Mr. Trump on side and be grateful to him for a number of reasons. Firstly, in the hope of getting a reduction in the 10% trade tariff imposed by Washington last month. Secondly, to reinforce political and defence ties between the two countries. And thirdly, and perhaps unofficially, for boosting his re-election prospects in Saturday's poll. Many people here believe the Trump factor and the electorate's misgivings about the president's recent policy statements helped to shift support to Labour and secure the defeat of Liberal leader Peter Dutton, who was perceived to be sympathetic to Mr. Trump's ideology, at least in the early days of the Australian election campaign. Well, be that as it may, Mr. Albanese was quick to heap praise on the American president today after the two men spoke on the phone. Mr. Trump, who earlier admitted he didn't really know much about the Australian poll, congratulated the Prime Minister and described him as a good man, while Mr. Albanese said it was a warm and positive conversation. He revealed that they talked tariffs as well as the AUKUS partnership, in which Australia will buy several nuclear-powered submarines from the United States. But above all, it demonstrated that the two men are happy to continue to engage with each other and on a face-to-face basis at some time in the future.
Well, let's get more insight on this. Let's bring in Rob Manwaring, Associate Professor, College of Business, Government and Law at Flinders University. Well, thanks so much for joining us on East Asia tonight. So let's talk about soaring costs, increasingly fraught relations with China, and of course, the uncertainty that's created by US tariffs among some of the main issues said to shape the polls. How do you think these issues will shape the direction of policy or leadership going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think what we probably can say with the new Albanese government is that I think the two watchwords will be sort of stability and caution. I think they're very mindful, and it was a real played out in the election here, is about the kind of global disturbances and the sort of Trump effect has the way it's kind of playing out in terms of global economic policy. So I think the Albanese government will be seeking to be kind of cautious, stable, and kind of reassuring.
So stability and caution central to Mr. Albanese's thought and how he wants to propel the country forward. But the country's economy, though, I mean, it's been mostly lifted, if I'm not mistaken, by immigration, property, as well as trade with China. But somehow foundations now seem somewhat shaky, don't you think? And do you think for the leaders it's going to be a straightforward fix, or do you think the tough reforms are just simply inevitable?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to unpack there. I mean, firstly, in terms of the spread of Australia's economy, I mean, the biggest, one of the most significant markets, of course, is our export of resources and minerals, and particularly into China. And so that remains a significant part of the economy. In Western Australia, for example, it's a huge part of kind of economic kind of growth. So Australia will be seeking to ensure that there's a sort of the clear markets for its kind of resources and its kind of minerals. Immigration was a sort of smaller factor within the election, and it sort of, there is this kind of ongoing kind of question about is an Albanese government prepared to kind of talk with the Australian public more explicitly about what kind of future immigration and skills needs looks like, because certain parts of the economy are heavily reliant on kind of immigration. And I think overall, the Albanese government will be seeking to sort of try and balance its kind of cultural ties, perhaps with America and the Trump administration, but perhaps it's try and also ensure stability with economic ties with China. And the one thing I just would further add is that relations with China deteriorated significantly under Scott Morrison's Liberal coalition government several years back. And part of perhaps the success, or one of the successes that the Albanese government was saying its first term, was trying to normalise and recalibrate its relationship with China. And I think in its second term, it will seek to sort of keep that relationship open and successful.
And how is that coming along? You mentioned about normalizing, trying to recalibrate relations with China. Do you think he has managed to repair the ties or the frayed ties which Scott Morrison, did back then?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, what was interesting is under the first term is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Foreign Minister Penny Wong who went, made a visit to China, which just hadn't even occurred because during the kind of the tail end of the Morrison kind of era, I mean, Chinese officials weren't even picking up the telephone to speak with the Australian kind of foreign minister at the time. So we're definitely seeing a kind of an opening up of that relationship. It's a difficult one and a tense one because Australia, as a strong, vibrant liberal democracy, in one sense, is still quite sceptical about dealing with some of the kind of the political record of kind of China, but also in one sense is also kind of worried about Chinese kind of expansionism. So one priority focus area I think will be interesting to watch will be how Australia engages with the sort of Asia Pacific area and the Pacific region. And I think it was very telling that Anthony Albanese has announced that his first overseas visit will be to Indonesia. And I think it's about trying to rebuild its relationship within the Pacific region, which again had deteriorated under the Morrison government.
So aside from trying to, mend ties with China, I mean, Australia also has to make sure that it doesn't get caught in the crossfire between US-China rivalry, right? So what kind of damage control will be needed there as the two superpowers compete?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I mean, Australia did relatively well compared to other countries out of the kind of the tariff liberation day under sort of the Trump administration. And it's sort of telling that President Trump seems to know very little about Australia. That probably actually, to a certain extent, might favour Australia because it's in one sense, it's not a kind of high economic kind of target in its size compared to other countries, perhaps say like Japan. I think the other way that Australia might seek to try and work out how to navigate these two sort of superpowers really is probably working with Keir Starmer in the UK. There are natural affinities between the two Labour parties. Both prime ministers come from very similar sorts of backgrounds and have a relatively shared outlook about how to navigate this. And I think that relationship with the UK in particular will be probably quite an interesting one as they try to build sort of a coalition of other like-minded countries to try and navigate this kind of dark shadow as it's been put.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about, security blocks like AUKUS and Quad agreements, that sort of reliance. Do you think that's inevitable when you're navigating this complex and changing Indo-Pacific environment? And is that why Mr. Albanese is choosing to go to Indonesia, for instance?
Yeah, quite right. And I think, in lots of ways, some of the global rules order is more unstable than it's ever been before. Some of these blocks probably probably more fragile than they have been before, and so that makes it kind of makes things probably more difficult to navigate. What I think is interesting for those your viewers with sort of longer memories is that when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister in 2007 in Australia, he, for example, floated the ideas about really trying to build up ASEAN and the kind of and that kind of bloc region, but it was an idea that never really went anywhere. What's different perhaps with Anthony Albanese is there's probably less sort of political ambition on the global stage to kind of create or refurbish some of these kind of global institutions. I think that he will take probably, as I said, a kind of more cautious and pragmatic relationship with a number of kind of key countries, really, to try and help sort of dampen down these kind of rising tensions.
Some really interesting points you've made there. Thanks so very much for sharing with us, Professor Rob Manwaring from Flinders University. Meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump says he is considering Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff at the White House, for the role of national security advisor. Well, this follows the departure of China hawk Mike Waltz, with his responsibilities now temporarily shouldered by Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Stephen Miller's at the top of the totem pole. I mean, I think he sort of indirectly already has that job. You understand? Because he has a lot to say about a lot of things. He's a very valued person in the administration, Stephen Miller.
Mr. Miller is seen as a central figure to the Trump administration's policies, and he's said to be among the U.S. president's closest aides. Well, he argued in front of the White House press corps last week that Americans would rather buy more expensive, locally made products of better quality than those made in China. It echoes Mr. Trump's remark when he said that parents may have to buy less toys for their children due to the high tariffs. And previously, in his Fox News appearance, Mr. Miller also defended Mr. Trump's tariffs as a means to prevent Beijing from achieving what he describes as complete economic domination. The job, however, could take months to fill. A World War II-era Navy ship from the Philippines, destined to be shot at and sunk during joint drills between Washington and Manila, capsized just hours before it was meant to be struck by live ammunition. Well, the BRP Miguel Malva, as seen here, took on water as it was towed in rough waters. Nobody was aboard the ship when it began to list and sink. Well, despite the premature sinking, U.S. and Philippine forces continued with other live-fire maneuvers on Monday for exercise Balikatan. The annual large-scale drills with some 14,000 participants will wrap up on Friday. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, from AI-powered classrooms to climate-smart farming. When we return, we take a look at the ideas driving the discussion at this year's Philanthropy Asia Summit. Innovation with purpose. That's the driving force behind this year's Philanthropy Asia Summit. At the heart of it is an innovation showcase where ideas from AI-powered classrooms to climate-smart farming aim to turn bold ambition into real impact. But how do these solutions get chosen? And how do they scale? Ilakia Selvaraji spoke with Sean Xiao, CEO of the Philanthropy Asia Alliance.
Asia is ripe for doing good. We're really trying to match global philanthropists and Asian philanthropists to really activate philanthropy in Asia. Asia is facing enormous challenges. We're talking about health challenges, climate challenges, education inclusive, but all these are related as well. And Asia is at the epicenter of a lot of emissions, rising health threats, and obviously rising temperatures as well. We all feel it. So I think this is really a time when we should really put the best minds together, put capital behind it to really try and protect the planet and the people.
No, absolutely. Why is Asia, uniquely positioned or even perhaps obligated to solve huge issues like climate change and even education in these times?
I think some of the worst challenges are actually in Asia, right at our doorstep. We're talking about accessibility to health, right, where people do not have incomes to access that, or people are living in remote villages. And how do you really then get them access to healthcare? We're really talking about climate here as well. Temperatures in Asia are rising twice as fast as the global average. And that's scary, isn't it? And that creates a lot of, say, diseases as well that we're seeing right now. We're also seeing climate change affecting floods that affect livelihoods, that affect access to education. They're all interrelated, and it's playing out in a really bad way for Asia.
Well, with all this that you've mentioned so far, would you say the solution is money in that sense, which comes through lots of philanthropists and their involvement, their concern to whatever's happening around the world that's, of course, impacting back to the humans who are living here.
Money is very important, but it's not the only input that we're looking at. We're looking at leveraging science, partnerships. We don't want people to be duplicating efforts, but to really put it all together, 1 + 1 = 3 at some point. And we really want to make sure then that global philanthropists understand what's happening in Asia. And Asian philanthropists, through interactions with the global philanthropists, will then have a better idea as to how philanthropy can advance too. So hoping that the two will actually come together and actually make a real difference to Asia.
There are many models, global models of philanthropy is really in the West. How do you see PAA really shaping an Asian way of those models here?
So we are going to basically advance at a pace that philanthropists from both sides of the world are comfortable with. Global philanthropy has really, especially Western philanthropy, has been really a bit more advanced. They've been thinking hard about the issues. In Asia, it's a different form of philanthropy. It's a lot of grant making, a lot of checkbook, traditional philanthropy. It's not a bad thing, they're all needed. But what we want to do is really to think a little bit more ambitiously about solving things together and coming up with solutions that can really scale.
And you are currently co-locating here at Marina Bay Sands with Ecosperity Week. I'm just wondering why co-locate? How do you see the synergy between philanthropy, private capital, and even policies in making systemic changes?
Very good question. In the area of climate, very, very obviously, you need a lot of capital in there. We're all missing all our climate goals. In order to solve for that, a lot of the innovation that goes on right now, for example, are really not very bankable. So private equity or private capital is not ready to deploy. But philanthropy has a very, very good reason too, because you're really thinking about risk capital, trying to undertake, say, a pilot or research until a point where private capital could actually come in. And that's really the best sweet spot for philanthropy to play. And that's why the two conferences are very relevant. Ecosperity plays to commercial capital. Philanthropy Asia Alliance is really all about philanthropists, capital coming together. And at this conference, PAS, we're seeing the coming together of a lot of stakeholders who want to do well. Really then is for us to get them all together to create solutions.
And I have just one last question before we end this interview. On a personal note, what is your wish for PAS come 5 years from now?
I've just joined PAS. It's only been a month. I've got a few ideas, really working with the members, right? I can't charge ahead alone. But I really would want to think about Asian philanthropy having a very big say in world global philanthropy, where then PAS is really the platform for people to come discuss issues. And if I do it right, people will actually want to pay for the conference, although I'm not going to charge.
Well, a key topic at the Ecosperity Week is the collective action to combat climate change before the year 2030. Attendees are discussing transformation, integrated systems, and united action across borders and sectors. Well, that mission took center stage at a fireside chat at this year's Ecosperity Week. Ella also attended the chat and shared with us snippets from the panel.
Global leaders are converging to turn ambition into action. The panel discussion saw tech titan and philanthropist Bill Gates and Singapore President Tharman Shanmugaratnam deep dive into how innovation, financing and bold partnerships can accelerate Asia's race to decarbonization and why the region is critical in the global climate fight. Let's have a listen to what Bill Gates had to say when asked about staying optimistic amidst tough times.
I would divide global health into three eras. There's the last 25 years with the great results. Then we have a period here which will last from 4 to 10 years where we have a lot less money and some of these poor countries, particularly in Africa, are very indebted and nobody's giving them the debt relief. So their financial situation is very, very weak.
Well, Bill Gates also confirmed today the news of Gates Foundation opening an office here in Singapore, and that is really to pad up efforts to further eradicate issues and handle the pandemic, not just the big ones, but also the silent pandemics as well.
Initially, when we thought of Asian innovation, we mostly thought about low cost, which is a great thing. I mean, the lowest cost vaccines in the world are made in India, Indonesia, this region. But more and more, the innovation is about cutting-edge work, genomics data that when you combine it with the AI will help us understand what is the disease prevalence, what differences are there across all the diverse populations here.
As Bill Gates shared on today's panel, Asia's innovation journey is moving from low-cost solutions to cutting-edge breakthroughs, with genomic data and AI paving the way for more precise, inclusive healthcare. It's a powerful reminder that the region isn't just catching up, it's truly leading the way in shaping the future of global health.
And before we go, some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. Global Times says China and Egypt have wrapped up their first ever joint Air Force training in what's also Beijing's first deployment of this kind to the region. Air superiority drills, suppressive defense, battlefield search and rescue are part of the 18-day exercise aimed at boosting military cooperation. The Taipei Times says that the Taiwanese government is looking to tighten rules on civil servants making trips to China, and that's to counter what the island calls growing infiltration efforts by Beijing. Now, this would require them to obtain approval prior to traveling, as they will be held publicly accountable through transparency. And we have the Korea Times reporting that there is a worrying surge in the number of children seeking mental health care in South Korea as the country marks Children's Day. Visits more than doubled over the past 4 years due to conditions such as depression and anxiety. Some 270,000 patients under the age of 18 visited psychiatric clinics between January and November last year. And that wraps up Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Thanks for your company. And don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Have a great evening.